all you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell, how the good old Union has come in here to dwell.
A battle in the heart of Alabama caught our attention. Coal miners in one community, they've been on strike now for months.
Working as long as 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, in some of the most dangerous conditions.
I really think that the labor movement is the single greatest force for democracy in the history of the United States.
The story of Alabama is a story of not just resilience, but of militancy.
I say no contract, you say no code. No contract, no contract.
If we ain't all free, ain't none of us free.
You're listening to Alabama's only union talk radio show, The Valley Labor Report, with Adam Keller and Jacob Morrison.
Hello, Tennessee Valley. This is The Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison, here with my co-host and fellow agitator, Adam Keller, and we are broadcasting live online and on the radio from the heart of the Tennessee Valley, the Spice Radio studio in Huntsville, Alabama. Today, a big win for the Alabama ACLU, but will it hold up? We have that conversation with Felicia Scalzetti from Hometown Action about the anti-assembly bill in Montgomery right now, and more on today's Valley Labor Report. If you want to be part of the program, normally we are pre-recording today. We are pre-recording today's show earlier in the week as Adam and I are down in Bessemer today, making house calls with RWDSU for the Amazon Union campaign. So you're not going to be able to call in live today, but if you would like to be part of the program next week, you can leave us a voicemail. We always check the voicemail, and we might play yours next week if you want to ask us a question. The phone number is 844-899-TVLR. That is 844-899-8857. If you haven't gotten enough of us by the time that we wrap on the radio, or if you just want to see what we're up to throughout the week, then you can find us online. We are all over the place. We're on Facebook. We're on Twitter. We are on YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts, all at the Valley Labor Report. And just a reminder, your support keeps us on the air. Our largest single source of funding comes directly from our listeners. If you want to become a sustaining member of the program or make a one-time donation, you can go to unionly.io/o/TVLR. That is unionly.io/o/TVLR or patreon.com/The Valley Labor Report. If you're a member of a union, then you should get your local to sponsor the show. You can reach out to me for more details on that. So last year there was what they called anti-riot legislation that went through the session, as this was the first opportunity for lawmakers in Alabama to address the police brutality protests of the summer of 2020. Working people all over the country from all sorts of different backgrounds, religious beliefs, and even political beliefs, while not unified on the specifics, all agreed there are issues with policing that need to be addressed. This was a common position across all sorts of working people, that there was a problem with policing in America, and they made their voices heard in the streets in the summer of 2020, and more people protested in these protests than any other moment in American history. So, Alabama Republicans responded by attempting to give cops more power. We tracked this legislation, and you can find our coverage of the legislation from last year linked in the show notes, but basically Republicans and their propagandists would have you believe that the legislation only increased penalties for, burning down a church or something like that, or murdering a cop's puppy. But that's not what it did. Listen to this. We've got a couple of clips from our conversation with Dev Wakely from Alabama Arise, a policy analyst with Alabama Arise, and he talks about what the bill does what the bill did in the last session, and we'll talk to Felicia about what's different this year. But Adam, let's go ahead and play that clip from last year, clip 1.
What does this bill do?
This bill expands the definition of riots, and what it really boils down to is this bill will criminalize protected First Amendment activities. If you go out and you protest and a police officer sees somebody do something that he doesn't like, basically, he could arrest pretty much everybody involved. This is a blank check for unconstitutional arrests. Worst case scenario with this bill, and this is no exaggeration, if somebody is at a protest where somebody else that they are not involved with in any way interferes with the operations of a police dog that is, say, chewing somebody's face off, then that person can be arrested for rioting. That's how much of an overreach this bill is. And what we heard today was bill proponents say, well, this bill is not intended to do that. But that doesn't really matter because that's what it does anyway.
Yeah. I mean, that was a lot of the defense last year. A lot of the defense from the pro-bill people was that, oh, that's not what it's meant to do. It's not meant to enable bad cops. It's not meant to do, it's not meant. Well, I don't care what thoughts are inside your head. I care about the words that are on this piece of paper that are going to become law in Alabama if you have your way. And that was the issue. And there was never any substantive defense against the accusations from people like Alabama Arise, from the Alabama ACLU, and other groups about this bill, about how damaging it would be for people's First Amendment right to protest. There was never any substantive defense about what they said. The defense was, oh, well, it's not meant to do this. It's meant to do this instead, this good thing, or this thing that might not be as bad. But they never addressed the substantive issues. Let's go ahead and play clip 2 for how they expanded the definition of riot.
The definition of riot is a tumultuous disturbance in a public place or penal institution by 5 or more persons assembled together and acting with a common intent, which create, and there's a lot more weasel language in here too, which creates a grave danger, again, subjective, of substantial damage, subjective, to public, private, or other property. I don't know what other property would be. Or serious, subjective, bodily injury to one or more persons, or substantially subjective, obstructs a law enforcement or other government function.
So you notice that he pointed out every time, oh, this is a subjective word. This is a subjective word. This is a subjective word. Every time he did that, who is going to be deciding what it means? It's going to be the cops in the field, who we just had a historic response from the American people, from working people all across the United States, that the cops have too much power. And when I opened it by saying that the Alabama Republicans' response to working people in Alabama saying cops have too much power was to give them more power, this is exactly what I'm talking about. That this bill gave cops more power to decide when and where and how loud and for how long and how often people can protest. And that's and none of those things are in the law. Those things are decisions that are going to be arbitrarily made by cops. And that's not acceptable. That's not acceptable. And not only did it expand the definition of riot and give an insane amount of discretion to cops, and we know how well that works in Huntsville, right? It also established a mandatory holding time if you are arrested under this law for the mandatory holding time in the first round. This bill was reintroduced later in the session last year, but the first iteration of it had a mandatory holding time of 48 hours. The charge could be dropped, as most cases were. Virtually every single case of protester where a protester was arrested in 2020, virtually every single one of those cases was ultimately dropped because they were unlawful arrests. There was no substance behind the arrest of these people. And they still, even without this law, it disrupted people's lives because they were only held in prison for a couple of hours or for a few hours before they could post bail. And they still lost jobs. I talked to somebody just last week about somebody losing jobs. And think about the economic ramifications of a working class person having to be holed up for 48 hours without being able to tell their job, I'm not going to be able to make it in. Even if they could tell them that I'm not going to be able to make it in. How many people that work in precarious environments is that going to fly for them for?
Right. How many bosses are going to be very understanding?
Right.
Hey, sorry, I'm calling you from jail. I was arrested at a protest. I won't be back for a couple of days.
And this mandatory holding time of 48 hours is more than for many violent crimes. That shows that the purpose of this law was not to protect property, to make protests more civil. It was to discourage protests. It was so that cops would have the arbitrary discretion to jail people for whenever they felt like it. And that's not acceptable. And it also made defunding the police, quote unquote, something that people could be sued for. And there was so much wrong with that. It's bad on its face, number one, because people ought to be able to protest. And yes, even disturb private and government functions. That's our right in America. But we can see how this law will be used against striking workers on picket lines as well. And we have enough laws, as we have seen in Brookwood, Alabama, we have enough laws that are used against striking workers in America today.
And that's what I was going to say is, not just the subjective decision-making on the fly of police officers, but then when you are charged, now you're in the hands of a judge.
Right.
Who, the Brookwood, Alabama picket lines is a great example. And we saw this in Colorado with strikers in at Kroger stores, where these judges, they use their discretion to come down hard on striking workers, community allies who are there on a picket line.
Yeah. Well, the law was defeated in the last session, but it's back. In fact, it was pre-filed before the session even began, and that's why Felicia is here today. Felicia Scalzetti is a digital organizer for Hometown Action. Felicia, thank you so much for talking to us today. I appreciate it.
Thank y'all for having me on.
So the first question for this is just how much of this new bill, how much of it is the same as the bill that was filed in the last session?
It's essentially identical. There are a few changes, like, for instance, the definition of riot is now what the definition was of the old bill towards the end. So as you kind of alluded to, there was a lot of pushback last year. And so the sponsor of the bill and other people on just various committees tried to add or remove language to make it less vague and blanketing of a law, and that still did not help. So now when they put it forward that the current, in this 2022 iteration of this bill, the current definition of riot is the assemblage of 5 or more persons resulting in conduct which creates an immediate danger of damage to property or injury to persons. The amount that is, you could drive a semi. You could drive a fleet of semis through the hole that creates. Creates, that's entirely subjective to officers there. So creating a danger to property, not that you've caused damage, because if you cause damage, that ends up being aggravated riot. Right. I mean, yes, that's absolutely already a crime. It also says or injury to persons, which I find really funny because I'm not a lawyer, but injury to which persons? Like, if you have 5 people and there's a bar fight, that's injury to persons, but I don't think we normally call that a riot. There's a lot of things under here, like, assemblage of 5 or more persons where there's an immediate danger of property damage. That's just tailgating. Mm-hmm. That's just tailgating. Right. That's a barbecue. That's, and this bill goes on to define public places, including parks, open spaces between apartment buildings. Basically, anything that is not a private residence is considered public under this bill. So, when we're talking about an assemblage of 5 people, that's a couple of teenagers on the corner.
Right.
You know, it's incredibly, incredibly broad.
Right. What about the holding time? Is that was that carried over?
Yeah, it's still there. It's 24 hours now. What is
how generous!
Really, really. Oh yeah, no, absolutely. And here's the thing about holding times. So I think y'all mentioned that you have people who talk to you about losing their jobs after even being just held a few hours. I was not held for just a few hours, and that was without a minimum holding time, and that has been the experience of a lot of people I know. And as far as I know, that clock does not start until you're booked, and that time that it takes to get booked, I mean, they slow walked us.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how much I can say that without it being like technically like libel or whatever, but they would slow walk us because you're not booked and in the system until you're fingerprinted and you have your mugshot taken. Well, for a lot of us, that'd be 7-8 hours in, and if that's when the clock starts, I mean, there's a lot, there's so much gray area in what can happen. There was a one time where we got arrested and they had us on a bus for 2 hours, not going anywhere, just in the bus, so you're not even at the station yet. So like, there's just so much that I could see this going wrong with normal activities, criminalizing, especially Black people, because this bill is explicitly racist, used to union bust, because if you just picked up a bunch of union supporters, or I don't know, the way that RWDSU was outside of the Amazon facility in Bessemer on public property, but how you could just arrest everybody. They'd be held for 24, what would likely turn into 30 plus hours. And then you have to fight this bill, and then you're trying to, pay people's fines, you're trying to coordinate court. Like that's a lot. And people will not show up if they think that there's a possibility of them getting caught into some sort of criminal net, just by trying to exercise their right to free speech.
Yeah, well, let's talk some more about the, we have, detailed since the beginning of the strike almost, there were, in Brookwood, there were injunctions filed against the union, limiting the number of people on the picket lines. At first, it was 11 or 12, then it was 10, then it was 6, then they were banned completely. Now they can have 2 people on a picket line at one time. So we've already got lots of laws on the books that are specifically designed to attack working people's right to picket and protest and things like this. But how would you envision this being used against, say, the coal miners in Brookwood, or other unions who go on strike, or picket, do an informational picket in front of their workplace?
Well, so this bill goes on to define a riot specifically. So, I mean, it gives that definition that I gave before, but it also says a person commits a crime of riot if, after receiving an order to disperse by a law enforcement officer or when in violation of curfew, the person intentionally participates in a riot. And I'm not being facetious, like that's literally how they define it. So, I mean, when you look at the miners, when you look at people striking or picketing outside of their workplace, a lot of them probably were told to leave by cops. And under this bill, that would count as violating, an order to disperse. And it doesn't say a lawful order to disperse, by the way. It just says order to disperse.
And we know that cops give lots of, just factually, cops give lots of unlawful orders, specifically unlawful orders to disperse.
Yes, they do. So, I don't know that word being in there makes this bill so much better. There's still so much in here that's incredibly harmful. But, when you take this as a totality, right, you can deter people from ever showing up in the first place under pain of, just fear of losing their job, having a criminal record, having issues with this showing up on background checks. We were told that even with these charges being dropped, we'd be eligible to pay for them to be expunged after a year. So that's a burden to prove that this never, the charges would be dropped. They didn't, you weren't convicted of anything, but just the arrest record itself is punitive for jobs and that sort of thing.
That in itself.
You have these mandatory holds.
I was going to say that in itself, the arrest record, that's such an important thing for folks who, have never gone through that, who may not realize that. it's great news to hear that your charges have been dismissed, but it's not over at that point. It is still tied to you and your record. And yeah, as you mentioned, that's a whole nother process and a whole nother set of fines and fees and dollars out of your pocket that you may not be able to afford.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Expungement is not an automatic process. You have to go and talk to a judge, and you likely need to retain a lawyer, and you need to pay money.
Right.
And that's fine if you're in management and you're bringing down 6-7 figures a year, you can probably afford to get out of something like that.
Right.
But the average person in Alabama and across this country certainly is not making that kind of money. Certainly not in Alabama.
Right. And let's talk about what happens if you do get convicted. Because this bill doesn't just have mandatory minimums for holding times if you get arrested. It has mandatory minimums that are not subject to parole or good time if you are convicted. So if you are convicted of a misdemeanor under this bill, and most of these things are felonies, but if you're convicted under a misdemeanor, 30 days minimum sentencing. No parole, no good time, nothing. The judge will have absolutely no choice but to sentence you to at least 30 days. If you get arrested and you're charged and convicted of a felony, 6 months.
Wow.
6 months minimum. And again, no parole, no good time, nada. And let's talk about some of the things that might get you a felony under this bill. Such incredibly harmful to the public health as committing the crime of unlawful traffic interference. Do y'all know what unlawful traffic interference is? Unlawful traffic interference under this bill is if you intentionally or recklessly impede vehicular traffic by walking, standing, sitting, kneeling, because I had to put kneeling in there, lying down, or placing an object in such a manner as to block passage of a vehicle on a public highway or interstate.
Wow.
So if you put traffic cones out there, that's unlawful traffic interference. Now, the first time you get arrested for this, it's a misdemeanor. And again, if you're convicted, that's 30 days. But the second time you get arrested, that's a Class C felony.
Wow.
For
and
kneeling
this can,
in the road.
I mean, that blocking traffic.
And imagine if you're blocking access to your workplace because you're picketing.
Exactly. Yeah, that's the thing. Even if it's a picket where you're allowing people through. So there were maybe 3 or 4 times over the course of this strike that the UMWA has over the course of the strike in Brookwood. 3 or 4 times the UMWA has purposely impeded traffic. They have purposely said, we will not let scabs cross this picket line today. It's not going to happen. And people were arrested for it. They were, they spent like a night in jail or something. But this law, if I'm understanding right, would have them first be sentenced to a minimum of 30 days in jail.
If they were convicted of it, yeah.
That's insane.
And I mean, on its face, they would be guilty of that crime, right?
Right. That's insane.
And this whole bill,
that's just not, that is just not, if you value people in a democracy should be able to say, like, that should be one of the weapons that we have in our arsenal to delay traffic, to disrupt the public order. This has to be something that people can do, and that's something that people in the labor movement have done to great success, to higher wages, better working conditions, better benefits, since the labor movement began, is these disruptive protests.
Yeah, I was going to add, I may be jumping ahead of us, but civil disobedience is the history of progressive change in this country. And by progressive change, I don't mean necessarily any political persuasion, just bare minimum progress.
Right.
Ending slavery, ending Jim Crow. These were done by social movements. All change in this country has come from the bottom up, from people organizing, protesting, utilizing civil disobedience. And, you mentioned earlier, Jacob, about what they meant. Oh, we didn't mean this, or we did mean this in the bill. For me, looking at this as a resident of Alabama, the only thing I can infer is that they mean to completely discourage civil disobedience and protest and free assembly. And for those who are, brave enough, I suppose, to try it anyway, to punish and really ruin people's lives.
Right.
For having the audacity to stand up for themselves and exercise their rights under the First Amendment of the Constitution, which, these same folks love the Constitution. Now, they love to talk about the Constitution. They love to talk about American values and our rights and our freedoms. After all, that's why folks hate us, I'm supposed to believe. I was growing up, I was told that all these folks halfway around the world hate us because we're so free.
Right.
So, that's my interpretation as a resident of Alabama who has engaged in protest activity. I'm getting the message loud and clear from the Alabama legislature that we should cease and desist, that we should sit down and shut up and stay home. Well, keep shopping. Now, we can keep shopping, but do not engage in any sort of protest against your government. And mind you, these are the same people who are supposed to not like government and want to shrink government. But damn it, you better not say anything about it or actually try to do that. And that's the interesting thing is I remember Tea Party protests. Mm-hmm. Now, granted, most of those were astroturfed by the Koch brothers and other right-wing billionaires and their front groups. But there's indisputable evidence that there were gatherings of conservative and right-leaning, right-wing kind of people in what would be a protest. So that'll be the other interesting thing to see if this bill goes through, the subjectivity and how it's enforced. Mm-hmm. And because I'm very curious to see how different the response might be to, say, an anti-vaccine, anti-mask type of protest at a school board versus a Black Lives Matter protest or a picket line in front of a workplace.
Yeah.
Well, it's really interesting that you mentioned that if that they want you to stay home, because actually under this bill you can get arrested for that too. And this is another insidious piece. I know, right? I told you, it just gets better and better. So there's they go on to talk about inciting a riot, right? That's a charge in here that they beef up. Oh, no, it's so much worse than you think. Here's the definition, right? Inciting to riot if he or she commands, solicits, incites, funds, urges, or otherwise aids and abets another person to engage in a riot or aggravated riot. Let's break that down for a second. Did you catch that bit, funds? Like, I don't know, maybe mutual aid funds, or I don't know, maybe how like the miners have been like collecting money from people to pay, not to pay, but like literally to sustain their children and their lives and their mortgages and their grocery bills, and how now if you determine that the miners rioted at some point, maybe everybody who, I don't know, put money into PayPal or Cash App or whatever, you just funded a riot.
Wow.
We're really concerned about that with it. I think they want to shut down bail funds, really, is I think what the intention there is. But again, This is so broad that it's anything. The other thing that this means is, when we were out there, and I see this happening at picket lines too, people will drive up and drop off water and basic supplies. You are aiding and abetting. You are funding in the sense of like, you're giving in-kind donation. Like it's incredibly insidious. And I just want to hit one point. I know usually hear people talk about this when they talk about this bill, as in like where it originally comes from, because it is true that this was first introduced after the uprisings in 2020, that this bill in particular in Alabama is actually supposedly written by, we're going to get to that in a second, but has been put forward by Representative Treadaway, who represents part of, Jefferson County and was the, I believe, deputy chief of police of the Birmingham Police Department at the time that he wrote this bill. Or presented this bill. But the thing is this bill and this language is not new. At the time that this bill was presented last year, there was, I think, 75 anti-protest bills in 33 states. And you don't get that kind of proliferation unless you guys are copying something. And it turns out the thing that they're copying is this bill from 2017. It's called a critical infrastructure bill, which, like all really insidious bills, uses a ridiculous name to distract from the actual intent. So what that bill is supposed to do and why it was created to begin with was to target indigenous people in South Dakota after the water protectors and Standing Rock protests. That's when we started to see these types of bills. So what the critical infrastructure bill is, and by the way, we also have a critical infrastructure bill in making its way through in Alabama right now. We've had one almost every year for years now that is not passed, but is also part of, current pending legislation. And it says like anything within X miles or X yards of, oil refinery or a pipeline or, maybe a coal plant. Yeah, it's critical infrastructure, and it carries with it increased penalties and fines. Wow. Like it bumps everything up to felonies. And we're talking 10 years. Like the original 2017, like the South Dakota one was a 10-year imprisonment if you in any way tampered with was considered like if you blocked access to pipelines or things of that nature, so they just upped the ante. And this bill takes language from that, just sort of takes pieces from these bills. It's like watching a virus replicate. You see it pop up originally in one place, and then you get all of these variants. We've been incredibly fortunate that in Alabama, we haven't seen the running protesters over variant yet. But like this has, this is directly
There's still
related.
A lot of time left in the session.
I know. But I mean, I always struggle between like scaring people versus like, hey, this is like, you need to be looking for this. This is an issue. Something else in here too, if you really want to bankrupt people, if you really want to drive a union out of business, if you're convicted of any of these, anything, I'm talking like blocking traffic, anything, you also have to pay any medical bills. You have to pay any amount of damage that you cause to the area, anything. And that's all, of course, incredibly subjective because who determines that, right? So like it's a cash cow. And differences from last year is that we have this new context of these 3 new prisons.
Right.
We have these 3 new mega prisons being built. And if they want to make money off of them, they need to fill them up. And this is a really easy way to pack them full of short-term people who are going to be paying a lot of fees, fines, restitution, and whatever. And if you get the added bonus of, breaking the back of a union in the process, well, that's just the cherry on top, isn't it?
Right. Well, so this is all insane, but we've seen a lot of this before. You mentioned that it's almost identical to last year, and it didn't pass last year. How did it happen that it did not pass last year? What stopped it last year?
It came down to the wire, but I really think that the primary thing that stopped it was Black women organizers just really put themselves out there. We drove down to Montgomery. For those listening on the radio, I'm not Black. I'm a white woman. But we drove down to Montgomery anytime that this bill was in committee, anytime, that it was being heard in any capacity. We really kicked and dug in our heels. We called for a public hearing. And last year, entrance to the State House was limited. Like we literally could not go inside and talk to legislators. If you've tried to contact your legislators before, you might know that a lot of their emails bounce and their voicemails are full. So if you don't actually have access to them, it's really hard to let them know, like, hey, a lot of people are upset about this, by the way.
Right. Yeah. Well, just really quick, I want to, these are all the same people that you can't reach because access to the State House is limited. These are the same people that are telling us that it's that teachers are horrible and lazy and they got a year of pay or 2 years of paid vacation because of remote learning, and they're going off on Madison County and Huntsville City educators for remote learning this week because they literally don't have enough staff to staff the schools. And, so that's just super weird that they're not at their workplace while they're chiding us to get back to work. That's odd to me. That's odd, but that's a different subject.
Well, they were in there. They just didn't want anybody else in there, which is just, it was also very funny, right? Because they were talking about health concerns and then not wearing masks. Yeah. So like whose concern actually, and that was a really big decision for people too, was that like, when we look at health disparities and outcome disparities from COVID, like Black Alabamians are disproportionately hit and disproportionately are dying for this. So when you're talking about, do we actually go in there to have a public hearing, like that is a health concern too. Right. So like, that's how bad, this is, that's how deeply we care about this, is that, we're willing to put our health at risk with reasonable precautions and wearing masks and trying to, be as safe as possible. But like, that's how important this is. So during that public hearing, they can't really be reached right in person. Maybe they got berated quite a bit by even their own colleagues. So, most of our Democratic elected officials are Black. Treadway was told to his face by a colleague of his on the same committee that he was acting like Bull Connor with this bill. And that wasn't enough to stop that same committee from passing it at the end of that meeting. I remember going to a committee hearing, waiting for it to pass out of the Senate, I think, or on the House floor. And within it was just an hour. And within that hour, they had passed like an anti-abortion bill, anti-trans bill, not passed like as into law, but just out of this, had passed anti-trans, anti-abortion, the anti-protest bill, and there was something else too. And I remember just looking around and looking at everybody, all of us who have multiple identities, during the uprisings, trans people and gay and just LGBT and marginalized and queer people were very much disproportionately the ones arrested. Women were disproportionately the ones arrested. We like literally 20 women to every one guy getting arrested. And so you see this piling on, right? You wouldn't think that the protest bill and the trans ban and the abortion bill and all of these things that we're all sort of fighting in these different corners, they're all connected because they're just all part of, let's put these same people down. Right. Let's put the same people who historically make the least amount of money, have the least protections, need unions, need these protections the most, are the most likely to be horribly affected by having an arrest record or by having, missing work or anything. Let's make sure that we keep them down still, because if they ever figure out that we're after all of them, right, we might not have enough people to put that down.
So what are its chances, what are its chances of passing this time?
I don't want to speak anything into existence. I waffle between oh God, it's gonna get through this time and maybe we have a fighting chance. So just in context, things that are different this year. We do actually have those prisons. They're built. They're a real thing now. It's not just some people accused us last year of being overly dramatic about that. Well, they're here now, and they are being built with COVID money. So if you really want to talk about legislators' priorities when it comes to taking care of Alabamians, well, there it is right there, right? Other things that are different this year, Bamazon had a huge national following. And I think it's incredibly important that RWDSU gets ahead of this and this messaging, hey, this is going to come after us. You are coming after us. UMWA, that's different than last year too. And having these minors talking about hey, you know what, y'all, we think that this is something criminalizing specifically Black Alabamians, but guess what? They're using it against us too. So that's interesting. Maybe this is a little broader than we think. So that's kind of in the plus side. All the other things on the plus side, and by plus I mean chances to get it defeated, right? Is that legislators are probably pretty sick of being in session. They've had to be in multiple special sessions. They had the prison special session. They had redistricting special session. They started the regular session early this year in January instead of in March, like they normally do. So they really haven't really gotten any breaks. And now they're in another special session, and then they're going to have to come back to regular session. The biggest thing, and this could either be a plus or minus, the biggest unknown factor here is that these legislators are running for re-election. Right. 2022 is an election year. Every single person is up for re-election, essentially, basically statewide in Alabama. So on one hand, they want to pass things that they can message to people at home and say, look at all these great things that I've accomplished. And so you see this proliferation of gross bills. I don't have a nicer way to put it. Just gross bills that are just not what we need in Alabama. On the other hand, they likely want the time to go home and campaign for re-election. Normally, you'd think that that's not a huge concern, but we did just redistrict. So technically, some people's lives are changed. They need to canvass new neighborhoods. They got to talk to different people. So
get new bribes. Donations.
Right.
Yes, and donations. So they actually, I think today or tomorrow is the day that they can start getting donations again, because when a session starts in an election year, they actually can't fundraise for like the first 3 weeks or 4 weeks. And now they're also in this special session on ARPA money. So there's all of these, I think it's very funny as somebody who grew up watching like the Newsies and like other, stories about like toppling these big things. It comes down to like such subtle things in reality, like what is the schedule and do people want to go home early on Friday? And like, that's the real. So last year, the bill almost passed. It was on the special, it made it basically all the way to like the last stop, essentially, on getting passed. And it just stalled out for time. The gambling bill ate up a lot of time. And I remember staying up till midnight because on the last day of the session, they literally went until midnight trying to get the gambling bill through. The anti-trans bill was on the docket as well. And we basically ran out the clock. That when we say defeated, that's really what it is. It's running out the clock. So when we're looking at running out the clock this year, those are sort of the things that are weighing on this. So far, unlike last year, this bill so far does not have any co-sponsors, which is interesting. Now, it did originally get introduced without co-sponsors last year, but a few weeks in, it had like 20. Right. It was part of the GOP agenda, the Alabama GOP agenda for like bills that they want to pass this year. So by no means can you count it out. And bills can get, co-sponsors and just not be uploaded right now because we're in like a special session. So I don't want to rest on laurels. I don't want to count this thing out. I want to hit it hard. I want to hit it fast. Our leverage points when it comes to defeating legislation is early. You can only have a public hearing if it's in a committee. You can't, by the time it gets to a floor vote, people will likely just fall along party lines, and then that's that. So you're the best way to get this done and out is to really give them an out. Don't vote against this bill. Just don't bring it up. Slow walk it. You don't have to tell your constituents I voted against the aggravated riot act. You just don't bring it up at all. Mm-hmm. Just don't even open that can of worms. Don't even touch it. And the best way to convince them to do that is to make it very clear that this isn't a winning issue for you. This isn't a winning issue for you across multiple demographics. This is not what you want to be running on. This is not your bread and butter politics.
Yep. Felicia, thank you so much for talking to us about this. This is a very important issue that is going to affect a lot of working people, our rights to protest our government and our workplace. And so that's very important. So I appreciate you taking the time to talk to us tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. And if you want to find out what's been going on with Hometown Action and get updates on this legislation, please follow us. Our link tree with all of our social media links is HMTN, like hometown, HMTN. So it's linktree/HMTN. Or you can find us on Facebook at Hometown Action, Instagram, same handle, Twitter, same handle, Hometown Action. So thank you all so much for having me again. It's been amazing. And thank you so much for bringing light to this important issue.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. We'll put those links in the show notes. All right, everybody. Thanks for tuning in to this is such an incredibly important issue. We've got to defeat this bill. We're going to go to a break really quick before we go on to our next topics about a new organizing tactic from my union, the American Federation of Government Employees, and a big win for the Alabama ACLU. Stay tuned. You're listening to the Valley Labor Report, and we will be right back. Support for this program also comes from the Iron Workers, Local 477. So if you are looking for contractors with lower than average EMR and TRIR, they tell me that if you need to know what those mean, then you will. Or if you need to supplement a workforce at any level for any amount of time, short or long term, if you need iron workers that come trained and certified at no extra cost, or if you need workers from superintendent down to general laborer, and you're looking to start work on a project, or you're unhappy with your current contractor situation, you need to call my friend Jeb Miles with the Ironworkers Local 477. They only work with the best in the business, vetted contractors, and can do all kinds of jobs, from roofing to steel and bridge erection, from welding to heavy rigging, from structural repairs to machinery alignment, and much more. They supply manpower on 4 of the 5 largest projects in North Alabama, so you know they're legit. If you need good quality, safe, efficient, diligent, and knowledgeable workers on your job, then you need the Ironworkers Local 477. Call Jeb Miles at 256-383-3334 or via email at local477@bellsouth.net, and make sure you tell them that you heard about them on the Valley Labor Report.
IBEW 558 is like a great football team. You've got to have the aptitude, skills, and knowledge to outperform the competition. If you're a non-union electrician, now is the perfect time to get off the sideline and join our team. We have the absolute best wages and benefit package in North Alabama and Southern Tennessee. It's because our team stands together, bargains together, and our families benefit from it. With immediate openings, you have the opportunity to see why the IBEW is the right choice.
Energy Alabama is a locally operated and membership-based nonprofit organization focused on advancing Alabama's clean energy future through education and advocacy. Many people in charge of infrastructure and building decisions simply don't know how viable clean and renewable energy is, and to that end, Energy Alabama has provided instruction to thousands of adults and tens of thousands of K-12 students across the state, and they are working hard to build careers in clean energy and help everyday Alabamians save money on their utility bills. Learn more about their work and how you can join at energyalabama.org.
Support for the Valley Labor Report comes from the International Federation of Professional and Technical Engineers Union. Learn more by visiting www.ifpte.org.
Support for this program comes from the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, Local 136, out of Central Alabama. Learn more at IBEW136.org.
Come on, you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell, how the good old union has come in here to dwell.
Labor creates all wealth. All wealth should go to labor. You are listening to the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison, here with my co-host and fellow agitator Adam Keller. We just wrapped up a conversation with Felicia Scalzetti with Hometown Action about the anti-protest bill that is going through the Alabama legislature right now. If you missed that, you can find all of our past broadcasts on our YouTube channel. We are going to talk now about a really, really cool interview with the National Director of Organizing of the American Federation of Government Employees. David Cann is his name, Brother David Cann. He did an interview with Ed Flash Ferentz of the America's Workforce Radio podcast. If you like this show, you would like that show. I highly recommend it. It's a great source of knowledge about what is happening all across the country in the labor movement. It is a daily union talk radio show. Monday through Friday, he's got an hour of content every single day interviewing. He does 2 interviews, 2 guests a day from different locals across the country. I mean, it's really, really great. The breadth of people that he talks to, the diversity of experience, the diversity of topics, and it's really, really cool. I mean, you hear all the way from like rank and file workers to sitting U.S. senators to international union presidents, like in the same week. I mean, it's awesome. You should listen to it. And my National Director of Organizing, David Cann, AFGE, spoke to him about a few things, but also about the renewed effort of AFGE to organize and especially to take advantage of the opportunity that we have with the Biden administration not trying to destroy us. So the Trump administration was not friendly to federal employees, to the people who take care of our nation's veterans in the VA, to the people who administer Social Security for our elderly and Social Security disability for the people who are not able to work, for people who administer important government functions like the Corps of Engineers. He was not friendly to federal employees. He did many things to hamper our ability to advocate for ourselves and to not improve our working conditions. And so the Biden administration is not trying to destroy us. And so we want to, as a union, take advantage of that. And the way that he talks about taking advantage of this opportunity that we have while we're in a less unfriendly environment is very heartening to hear coming from the very top of my union. And I think that this is the strategy that all unions should be taking, what he talks about. And he's a relatively new hire, and I wouldn't doubt that he is somebody. This is just my speculation, but I wouldn't doubt that this is somebody that Reverend Everett Kelly specifically wanted on board because of his philosophy of organizing, because Reverend Everett Kelly has been extremely successful in organizing everywhere he has been in leadership. When he was the president of the Anniston Army Depot, the union there, their union membership increased over the course of like 5 years, more than double, from 1,200 to 2,600 members. And the same thing for District 5, which is the southern district of the United States. We added like 20,000 members across the Southeast while he was the representative for District 5. I mean, he's a great leader. I appreciate his work. And let's listen to David Cann, National Director of Organizing for the American Federation of Government Employees, talk about how our union is going to approach bringing in new members.
We're changing the model of organizing we're doing and changing the model of union that we are, and as a result of that. A lot of conversations that union folks, good unions, our union oftentimes have had with people in the past is, you can't afford not to have a labor union. You wouldn't not have health insurance. You don't know if you're going to get sick. Mm-hmm. You wouldn't not have car insurance. It's against the law, and you don't know if you're going to have an accident. You would not have job insurance. You never know when you're going to need the ability to be represented. And that was not always, but oftentimes the pitch we made. And what we've discovered, or at the Federation, the change we're making, is that message doesn't do what we need it to do for the type of growth and the type of power building we want to be doing. We need to be doing. Because it makes folks think that the union isn't them. It makes them think that the union is a union officer or a staffer or some other person that will make change for them. And while we do have great officers and we've got great staff, I'm pleased to say I count myself amongst their number. The thing that makes real power is having people be involved in their job, having a voice on the job, being engaged. And so the message we have and the type of organizing we do is changed. It's not just inviting people to join and letting them know that they've got fighters in their corner. It's getting people involved based around the things that they care about and making sure that from the moment they sign, from the moment they consider signing, they know that there is a role for them to be involved for building power, whether that's signing petitions, whether that's going to rallies, whether that's finding a place in doing some representational or organizing or communications work themselves in their local, and building ground up based on the issues and the concerns that every single member and potential member has. And it's been absolutely transformational.
So that was our National Director of the American Federation of Government Employees, the National Director of Organizing, David Cann, on with Ed Flash Ferentz of America's Workforce Radio podcast, talking about the new model and philosophy of organization within AFGE. And it was very, very heartening to hear, because there are a lot of people who conceive of their union in this way. And there are a lot of people who foster that conception of a union as a service, of a union that is separate from the membership, of a union that is that's like health insurance or like life insurance or car insurance, or as opposed to an organization of, by, and for working people to advocate for working people, standing up for each other to make their life better. That's a totally different thing when you center the model of organization on our power comes from the members, because in every union, whether they understand it or not, or whether this is the type of thing that they want to engender in their membership, their power comes from the membership. Whether they acknowledge that or foster that conception or not, that is where their power comes from. And when you look at unions who have been able to be somewhat successful in a service model, it's basically they're running on the fumes of previous membership involvement.
Absolutely.
And where those fumes have run dry, it has taken member involvement to renew those gains, to start winning again. We can look. I mean, this is exactly what has happened at John Deere with the United Auto Workers. The United Auto Workers has, unfortunately, in a lot of cases, turned towards a model of service unionism, of unionism that sees the officers and the people that are filing the grievances and all this as separate from the workers. And what have we seen over the course of this model that has been paired with the management cooperation model of the UAW? We have seen a concessionary contract after concessionary contract after concessionary contract with the big three automakers and other UAW employers. And now, for the first time in the manufacturing sector in the United States in 40 years, we're seeing contracts where working people are making gains again. How did that happen? It happened because the membership got involved. The membership struck. The membership voted down. They didn't passively accept a tentative agreement that was handed to them by the boss. They said, no, we're not going to accept this. And they struck. And the union supported them, but they struck. They made the decision to strike. And they voted down not one, but two contracts at John Deere. Kellogg's did the same thing with the BCTGM. They voted down not one, but two contracts to try to get the best deal that they thought that they could get. It was membership involvement that has finally allowed people to begin to see gains again. And that's what it's going to take for every union, and that's what it's going to take for AFGE to be able to take advantage of this opportunity that we have, of this less unfriendly playing field, so that we are prepared in 2024 when and if, knock on wood, we have another anti-worker president, another extremely anti-worker president, extremely specifically anti-federal worker president. So I loved hearing that.
I really did too. I so relate to this discussion about types of unionism and the models involved. And we've touched on it a little bit in the show. There are, of course, different types of unions and different ways of setting up a union and operating a union. And you have trade unions who sort of function almost like hiring halls to some extent, which operate quite differently from public sector unions. There's differences in terms of who all is in your union. Is it wall to wall? Does it cover the entire workplace? Or is it broken down by craft? There's really a conception of unions that has been, I would say, the majority of unions in the past several decades of, a service model where oftentimes the union themselves and certainly the union leadership third party themselves. Mm-hmm. We've talked a little bit about this. You and David did such a great job diving into the Amazon campaign and Bessemer and some of the anti-union talking points. And time again, anytime we're looking at union busting, one of the first things that the boss does is try to instill in the workforce that the union is an outside third party.
Right.
And unfortunately, we have unions and union leaders who go with that. They accept that logic from the boss and run with it.
Right.
And I think if you talk to a rank and file union member, ask them about their union, and do they say us or them? Mm-hmm. That's going to be the tell.
Right.
And I think David Cann did a great job there in talking about the way unions have often pitched themselves.
Mm-hmm. Right.
You know,
and I mean, it's not like necessarily an untrue, and that's what makes it so enticing, is that
right.
it's an easy sell to make someone it's an easy sell to say, oh yeah, if you give me. If I give you $30, $40 a month, $13 every paycheck, then I'll be protected. Well, sure, whatever. It's just like a Hulu subscription, but that's not. If you just have 1,000 people with Hulu subscriptions, that's not a base of power. That's not going to be. That's not going to be threatening to your boss, and ultimately, that's what a union has to be: is threatening to your boss. If you have 1,000 Hulu subscribers, that doesn't matter. That doesn't matter at all. You have to have power, people that are willing to that conceive of themselves as part of a union, as people who are in communion with their sisters and brothers on the job for the purpose of making their job better.
That it's us, not a them. It's an us. And I want to be very clear here and just expand on what you said, that it's not that service is not important. People join their unions for all kinds of reasons. And of course, one of the most immediate ones is for the protection it provides. And, if you get in trouble, you have someone who you can call and have some help. That is critical. That is important. And anybody who has the opportunity to get that protection needs to get that protection. So it's not to discount that. The services are very important, and the quality of representation and defense that you get, and the quality of the lawyers that you're provided. All of those things are very, very important. But you can't stop there.
Right.
And I think that's what you're touching on, is that because it's kind of the low-hanging fruit, it's the most it's the least controversial.
Right.
Right? Because doctors and lawyers, they have liability insurance. Mm-hmm. So when you start to get down that road of selling yourself as an insurance policy, you start to act like an insurance agency, not a union, right. Not grounded in a labor movement.
Right.
And as you can imagine, this clip resonated with me quite a bit, having worked for an organization that won't even call themselves a union. Mm-hmm. Even though they're an affiliate of the largest teachers union in the country, one of the largest unions in the world, they won't even accept the label of union. They flat out themselves reject that and reject being part of the labor movement. In their eyes, that's the politically expedient thing to do to maintain their membership in conservative areas. That's a separate conversation there, but that's the disturbing thing is how many folks have worked their way to leadership in unions and quote unquote professional organizations that should be unions,
right?
And who hold that kind of philosophy, and it is part of the recruiting. It's part of the internal organizing, such as it is. And unfortunately, in some of these cases, if there's any internal organizing going on, it's just making sure that your members know about the discounts they can get. It's making sure the members know, well, hey, if you're if you have a workplace injury, you should call this number and we'll get you plugged into our attorney. That's not the same as internal organizing and real education. And that's one of the most important roles that unions have is as an educator. By giving people the connections and relationships to learn from one another, giving people the resources they have to expand their knowledge, and helping to educate members on where their issues in the workplace connect to other workplaces and to the broader community and society and political economy. We have seen, as the labor movement has declined over the decades, that piece has really declined as well. But as you mentioned, there's been a trend away from that business unionism, service model unionism that is kind of focused on pitching an individual service and collaborating with the boss. There's been a very inspiring trend of broader organizing model and even social movement type unionism. And that's what we've seen in Chicago with the teachers union there, in the caucus of rank and file educators. And as you mentioned with John Deere and many of the strikes we've seen over the past year, we've seen workers take it really in their own hands and not simply just fall in line with what the union leadership has said. And that, again, I don't want to play into some of the right-wing tropes about quote-unquote union bosses. We've talked on this show before that every union has its own varying degrees of democracy and varying degrees of leadership models and varying qualities of leaders, frankly.
As does any organization.
As does any organization. And I think any of the trends that you see in any organization, you can see in labor organizations where if you don't have a constant renewal of people coming in to step into leadership, to step into new roles, you start to see atrophy. And that's what you're discussing there, where in some cases, the best victories and the greatest gains are things that happened before your members were even born.
Right. And that's hard to organize people around when they don't even remember the last big win, where, people at John Deere, they now have, a few months ago, I remember winning 20% raise over the next 5 years, a 10% raise immediately, and an $8,500 signing bonus. That's what I remember personally, me in my life. That's a big deal, as opposed to hearing about something that happened 30 years ago,
and the collective
that you still benefit from.
The collective action part of it is so important. Right. It's different even if you do get a win, but it's something that like your lobby team down at the state capitol pulled off, or your lobby team in D.C. pulled it off. That's great.
And in that case, it would be easy for the lobby team to say, oh, look what we did, as opposed to look what the power y'all gave us to work with did.
Right.
Like there would be even different ways to frame a lobbying victory that can feed into a model of service unionism, or a model of like David Cann was talking about, a model of unionism that puts the member first, that says our membership is where our power is, and things like this.
Absolutely.
And so that brings us to our next topic. We all know that the Amazon the new election at Amazon in Bessemer for whether or not they want to join the retail, wholesale, and department store union, that is underway. The National Labor Relations Board, on a dime, like really kind of out of the blue, said, okay, in 3 weeks we're going to mail ballots out. That was not that wasn't really what the union was expecting, I don't think, and that's really unfortunate that there was such a quick turnaround there. There was some hope that there would be more time, but it is what it is, and the ballots will be mailed out when you hear this on February the 4th. I believe that's on a Tuesday, or I can't remember. Early in February.
A day that ends in Y.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure.
Early in February, ballots are going to be mailed out, and they'll be counted late in March. Basically, exactly a year after the last election. And so the North Alabama Area Labor Council has, we passed a resolution in December to, beginning in 2022, once a month, to send people down that are members of affiliate unions in the area, to send people down to make house calls with the retail, wholesale, and department store union. And so that's what we're doing today. We recorded this episode earlier in the week, and I am down right now in Bessemer talking to workers about how to make their lives better, and talking to them about how the union is not some scary third party that is going to take your money and tell you to strike and tell you to forego a paycheck, that is going to tell you what to do and things like that, because that's not the reality. This is something that Amazon said in the last go round, and something that David and I talked about. But the union, and I know from talking to the organizers with RWDSU that they have the same philosophy on this as David Cann does. I spoke to Adam Obernauer last time I was down in Bessemer, and there were some Amazon workers around us, and I was talking to Adam. He's the lead organizer on this campaign, and some of the organizers or some of the workers at Amazon asked him a question about, like, a strategy question, like, okay, we're having this problem, should we do this? Like, what should we do this, or should we do this, or is this whatever? And Adam was like, well, ultimately it's your decision because it's your union. And I loved hearing that, and it makes it easy for me to support this campaign, knowing that there are people like Adam down there impressing on these people that we are, you are where, to the extent after we win the election, to the extent that we have power, you are where that power will come from. You are the people that will be bargaining your contracts. You know, if and when, Lord willing, if and when workers at Amazon and Bessemer win their election and the retail, wholesale, and department store union becomes their bargaining agent, how's that contract going to be bargained? That contract is going to be bargained by a negotiating committee that is elected from the rank and file, by the rank and file. They will be able to help write the contract that they work under in Bessemer, Alabama. They will be able to decide how they want things structured, what are the important issues to them, and the things that they like about the job. Maybe there are some things that they like about the job. You know,
now they can fight to keep it.
They can fight to keep it. Put it in writing so that it's not at the whim of Bezos. And so we're down there talking to them about this, trying to dissuade them of the anti-union propaganda that they have heard from Amazon, and tell them that no, this is just a formalization of saying that you are the people that do the work, so you are the people, you should have a say over how and when and where and for how much the work is done. RWDSU is not going to be coming in and dictating this or that or whatever. It's a voluntary organization that you will be a part of, and that you will create, and that you will be where the power comes from. And I know that that's the philosophy that Adam and them down there have, and I'm really excited to be able to spend the day with them. And it's going to be fun. We've got people from already. I'm speaking on Tuesday. Sent out the notice on Sunday, and already we have machinists, we have letter carriers, we have federal employees, and I believe that we have iron workers already going down. And all of these people. Letter carriers, I guess you could say, have an interest in Amazon, in organizing Amazon, because there's a certain amount of competition there. But like iron workers, they built the facility down there in Bessemer, and they're building the facility here in Huntsville. The union iron workers are. That's, whether or not they're union, as far as how iron workers are paid, is not really material. It's not material to me. Whether I'm not getting a paycheck for going down there and talking to them, and I'm not going to get a paycheck if they win or if they lose. I'm doing this because, and these people are doing this, these iron workers, these letter carriers, these machinists are doing it because we have seen the value that a union can provide working people. And we, as Alabamians, all of us, I think, everybody that has said that they're going to come, I believe that everybody was born and raised in Alabama that's going to be going down there. We as Alabamians, as working people, see the value that it brings, and we love our people. And we want our people to be better and to do better and to have better. And we want our people to be able to keep more of the value that they create, as opposed to the value that we create here in Alabama being extracted from our people and given to elites in New York and California. We want the value that we create to stay in our communities instead of being extracted and given to billionaires across the country and across the world and on pedophile islands. And I don't think that's unreasonable, and I don't think that's un-Alabamian, and I don't even, frankly, think that it's a crazy, left-wing, insane thing to want, to say that, oh, the work that's done in Alabama, Alabamians ought to benefit from it. And the same thing with the coal miners' strike. I'm not going to benefit. I don't get a paycheck whether they win the strike or not, but this coal is Alabama coal. I reckon Alabamians ought to benefit from it. Not New York hedge fund managers. That's not insane. But that's not something that you hear on the radio very often. It's not something that you hear from our politicians, from the people that are supposed to be protecting Alabamians. They're not standing up for Alabamians. They're standing up for the people in New York that are taking our natural resources and that are taking the value that we create and throwing it in a bank account so that they can see the line go up. So that's what I'm doing today.
Amen, brother. Amen. I wasn't even going to jump in there. You were on such a roll. But I want to say a sincere thank you to the North Alabama Labor Council and to you and your leadership on that, and to all of the people who are volunteering their time, their gas, their energy.
Their weekend.
All
day on Saturday. Once a month. All day on Saturday, once a month until the election is over was the resolution that the North Alabama Labor Council passed in December.
So I think that's just a fantastic display of solidarity, and I really hope that it makes a difference. And I hope that some great conversations come out of it, conversations that turn into relationships, and conversations that can resonate with people well beyond this particular election and particular workplace even.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, we've seen what happened with Starbucks. It started with 3 election filings in Buffalo, New York, and now
spread like wildfire.
There are more than 30, I think. More than 30. 500 some odd workers involved in union elections at Starbucks. It's fantastic. It's really, really great. Very exciting. So, you've been listening to the Valley Labor Report. We are going to go to a break, and we will have one more segment for you, so don't turn that dial. You are listening to Jacob Morrison and Adam Keller on the Valley Labor Report, and we will be right back. Energy Alabama supports consumers and is a leader in advocating for them. They have been able to successfully fight off utility rate increases in the state, reduce fees for electric vehicles, increase electric vehicle infrastructure spending, and they secured a $100 million refund by Alabama Power after the utility overcharged customers for fuel. To learn more about their work advocating for customers and to join the fight, go to energyalabama.org.
There's a lot of talk about a shortage of workers, but that's not the case with IBEW 558. We have provided our customers over 3,000 workers and performed over 3 million man-hours in a pandemic year. With 8,000 OJT hours, 900 classroom hours, OSHA 30, and a state license, our members receive the equivalent of a master's degree. That's what makes IBEW 558 the right choice for your electrical needs. Look us up at Facebook or at IBEW558.org.
The attorneys of Maples, Tucker, and Jacobs are proud to represent working people in Alabama and across the Southeast. They have over 100 years of experience representing injured workers in workers' compensation, personal injury, and disability claims. Let their attorneys help you when you get injured on the job. You can find them at www.mtandj.com or 855-617-9333. Let Maples, Tucker, and Jacobs help you when you get injured on the job. Again, the website is www.mtandj.com or the phone number 855-617-9333. No representation is made that the quality of legal services is greater than the quality of legal services from other law firms.
We're the nurses, firefighters, and claims representatives that help keep our government services running. We respond to natural disasters. We care for our nation's veterans, and we investigate discrimination in the workplace. We are federal and D.C. government workers, and we are proud to serve the American people. Working in more than 70 agencies across the government, we know we can fulfill our mission because our union has our back. Learn more at afge.org. Paid for by the American Federation of Government Employees, AFL-CIO.
North Alabama DSA is looking for folks to work for a better North Alabama. They prioritize mutual aid, municipal activism, and union solidarity. Contact them on social media or DSANorthAlabama@gmail for more information.
Come on, you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell. How the good old union has come in here to dwell.
Welcome back to the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison, here with my co-host and fellow agitator, Adam Keller. We had a voicemail going into the voicemail bag this week. And we had a clip, a voicemail asking about organizing small shops. Do we have any advice for people that are organizing small shops? Adam, let's go ahead and play that.
Howdy there, folks. I'm up here in Minnesota, or Wisconsin, rather. I had a question for you. Talking about organizing small shops. I've worked in UFCW shops in the past, SEIU shops in the past. I've been a shop steward, but now I work in a small business, which I would like to organize, but gosh darn if that isn't a challenge. Any advice you have for organizing small businesses, 30 minus employees, something like that. Yeah, thank you so much. Solidarity, love what you do. All right, take care.
All right, so I appreciate your call, and that's really fascinating. Having been a shop steward with the UFCW before, so you've already got a lot of experience there that should help you in organizing. But I would say, Adam, do you have any thoughts off the top of your head about organizing a small shop? 30 or less employees that would be different than organizing maybe a larger shop?
Well, I think because there's so few people, the dynamics of personalities and relationships is going to be, maybe even more important than in a larger workplace. 30 or less folks, that's not a lot. Mm-hmm. I think if we look back at our reports from Jonah Furman and the International, Labor Action Tracker with Cornell, if you look at just what's been happening in the labor movement, there's been a ton of success with small shops. Mm-hmm. It seems like actually that's where a lot of the energy has been. So I think that's promising. But yeah, my gut reaction is the people. Those personalities, and so your organizing committee, think very long and hard about who can be on that organizing committee and who are the best fits to that, and who's going to be kind of compatible with the broader workforce that you're trying to organize and reach. And we've talked about this before, and I would think maybe even Connor Lewis talked about this with us in some of our Unions 101 videos. But the organizing committee is not necessarily always the loudest, most outspoken worker. If you're the one who's always speaking up in the staff meetings and always kind of having some conflict with management, you may have this reputation as kind of a fierce fighter among the staff, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be the go-to person for the organizing committee, or that you necessarily even are going to excel in some of the logistics of it.
Right.
On the flip side to it, I think because it's a smaller workshop, it's easier to break it down and sort of map out who is who does what,
who knows who,
and that's one of the important things is kind of power mapping and mapping out the workplace, not just physically where people, whether it's offices or stations, you need to know that too. That's important, but also just mapping out, the dynamics of relationships and experience. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there. And typically, this is just, my assumption here, but my assumption would be with it being a smaller workforce like that, the management may not have quite the arsenal of anti-union techniques and funding that, Jeff Bezos has at Amazon.
Right.
They can pull out all the stops and hire the best lawyers.
Unless it's a small shop of a large... Because all of these... So one of the things that I was going to say was that all of these Starbucks locations are basically all small shops. All 30 people or less. Right. But they've of course seen this huge onslaught. So I don't know. I think maybe you said something about it being a small business, and so maybe you wouldn't have that. But then you're going to have this potentially, maybe you have this small business hero job creator mentality, because people kind of worship at the altar of small businesses, and I don't know, maybe
they may take it very personal.
Right, exactly. Adam was talking about how that the personalities are going to be very important, and it'll be maybe more personal than political than you would have in a larger shop. Because at a place like Amazon, where you've got 6,000 workers, you as an individual person will not be able to talk to every single one of these 6,000. There's going to have to be a whole lot more delegation, and a lot of people, you're talking to this person who's talking to that person who knows these 5 people, and one of them knows this person. Whereas in a shop of 30 people, I would be surprised if you don't know every single person's first and last name and a lot of their relatives.
Start there, I would say. If you're not already clear about every person there, what their job is, that's one of your first tasks is going to be to do that prep work and research, figure out, how long has everyone worked there, before you even get into the dynamics of their union affiliation, like how warm or cold they are with unions in general. But at least that is an opportunity, though. I mean, to be able to actually talk with every person in the shop. So I can see where there is some distinctions if it's a small business versus a small shop of a larger corporation, but.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's it. It's the blessing and the curse is how personal that's going to be.
Those are going to be the first things that you want to do. You want to do a physical map, you want to do a social map, and you want to start having one-on-one conversations with your coworkers to try to get to know them better and to try to get to know about their experience at work. For one, because that's going to help you in the campaign. Because you're not going to be able to win a union campaign on wages, let's say, if everybody's really happy with their wages, and the only thing that they care about is getting more time off.
Right.
If everybody, and this is something that David has talked to me about, and this is you're in a small shop, it's probably not applicable, but just to illustrate the point that you need to know what people are upset about. The Machinists Union, David's union, organizes lots of people who make six-figure salaries. Lots of people that are the machinists who are pretty,
highly skilled,
highly
compensated,
skilled, highly trained, and they do highly valued work in the sectors that they do. And so wages for these people are like really not the important things. It's having a say.
It may
on
not
the
be
job.
the most pressing,
right?
That you're feeling every day when you
and so
show up.
You want to know what your coworkers are like. What is it that animates them? And so you want to know that because it'll help the campaign, but also because you care. Because as a person who wants a union, you like. The reason that you want a union is to make your life better and to make their life better. You don't want a union just because a union is it sounds nice when I say it. It's a pretty word. Like the vibrations in my head feel good.
And it's not just to prove a point, politically, okay, I'm supposed to like unions, so I guess we should do one here.
Right. And if that's probably not going to work because we've seen how it wouldn't work if you were just animated by, I'm supposed to like unions, so let's do one here.
Yeah.
Because we've seen how many progressive nonprofits or whatever have there has been a unionization effort, and management has tried to kill it, and then sometimes has effectively killed it, has killed the union campaign, because there were some people that probably kind of had a that's not going to win your union. You're going to win your union by bringing people together. And so, have those maps, have those conversations, and try to bring somebody in, bring another. With a 30-person workplace, you could even start with a committee of 3, and that would be really good. And go with that committee of 3 to find a local union that is willing to support your campaign, that is willing to put resources into your campaign, and be a part of and be a part of them. And you can find a local union, reaching out to your local labor council, to the state federation of the AFL-CIO, or your local IWW chapter. These are all places that you can go to find a union that will support your campaign.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing, just to kind of take the flip side to that about the political beliefs of the workers involved, do not just write people off.
Yes.
Because you've seen their Facebook and the crazy crap they post on Facebook. Or you've heard things that kind of make you cringe a little bit. Don't write them off.
Right.
Of course, be aware of where these people are coming from, what their ideas and beliefs are, so that you can try to meet them where they're at. But again, you can't just be a total ideologue and hey, Nancy down the hall, she's a total right winger. She loves Trump. She hates unions. She hates Democrats. There's no sense in talking to her.
Right.
You can't have that approach.
No,
because you'd be surprised that maybe she's one of your go-to people.
Mm-hmm.
She may have a lot of problematic ideas about other types of people outside of the workplace, but that doesn't necessarily mean that she could not be a yes vote, or perhaps even a volunteer.
We have spoken to even a volunteer or a leader in the union, and an effective leader in your union can be a person who considers themselves conservative politically. It is not. That's not as uncommon as one might think. And you can go back in our back catalog. It's been probably a year and a half ago. One of the first interviews that we did was with a conservative nurse in Pennsylvania who was talking about his involvement in his union campaign and how he became a leader in his union. And we were talking with him and a more liberal nurse about how, despite some of their political differences that they came together and that this union campaign has brought them closer together, has brought given them more respect for one another as people, as individuals, even though they have different opinions, and has emboldened them and empowered them to make changes in their workplace that make their lives better, that make their lives and the lives of their coworkers and their sisters and brothers on the job better.
And that's exactly where I was going to go with this, that you'd be surprised that experience of someone taking the time to have the one-on-one conversation and the experience of the actual organizing drive, or even if you already have a union and you're working on a certain issue, the experience of that collective action and the relationship building can sometimes move those people in a direction you want to move them. Because yes, just on a basic like humanity level, you can make some gains there, and respect and concern for other people. So don't write anybody off immediately. Get to know people, get to know your core that you can rely on, that you know are going to be with you, and have some
take
skills.
A training. Take an organizer training, labor notes.
That's my last suggestion. Go to labornotes.org
and figure out when their next organizer training is going to be, or your local IWW may put on an organizer training. The IWW's organizer training is really good. I'm an IWW organizer trainer, and so there are organizer trainings that the IWW does that is open to anybody. Labor Notes does really good organizer trainings. Jane McAlevey has been given some good trainings. So try to find one of those.
Yeah, absolutely. And, go back, even if it's a recording of a Zoom meeting. And I highly, highly recommend the training materials that are available in Labor Notes.
Secrets of a Successful
Organizer, Beating Apathy, even the strike guide that they put out recently or last couple of years has a ton of resources, practical resources.
Yeah.
So do a little bit of homework and start to know people. Those are your ground level before you get into the weeds of building a union.
Right.
But definitely wishing this caller all the best.
Keep us updated.
Keep us informed. If there's ways that you think we can help you, let us know.
Yeah, and call us back and let us know how it's going. Appreciate the call. So for our last segment of the day, we're going to do Last Week in Southern Labor. Last Week in Southern Labor is a segment that we do every week, courtesy of Jonah Furman. He does a newsletter called Who Gets the Bird that you can read at whogetsthebird.substack.com that goes over what happened in all of labor in the United States. Every week, he goes over what happened the last week in U.S. labor, and so we pull from that, with his permission, what happened in the South of the United States in the labor movement. And last week, in new organizing, we saw 1,100 workers who mostly make Reese's at Hershey's second largest plant in the United States in Stewart's Draft, Virginia. They're organizing with the BCTGM. BCTGM, I mean, in the last 2 or 3 years has really been on a roll. Bakery,
busy.
Yeah, been busy. Bakery, confectionery, tobacco workers, and Grain Millers International Union. They are organizing with the BCTGM. It is only the 25th or so 1,000 worker plus filing at the NLRB in the past 5 years. And of those, no non-healthcare or education workers have won. There has not been a single non-healthcare or education worker win that has been over 1,000 workers. So this would be an important victory. Local reporting has some of the details of the union drive as of November. 176 Starbucks workers across 8 states just last week. 170 and more have come out since this newsletter. 176 Starbucks workers just since last week across 8 stores, 1 in Memphis and 2 in Richmond in the South, have officially filed for elections with Workers United. And some of these are new announcements this week that are stores that waited to file the official paperwork after announcing. And 6 building cleaners at an office park that houses intelligence agencies in McLean, Virginia, are joining Operating Engineers Local 99.
That's interesting. I'm curious what they may find cleaning the building of the intelligence agency. They might want to treat that union with respect.
Right.
Take care of those workers, because there's no telling what secrets they may hear and see.
In strikes and bargaining, the Warrior Met strike by 1,100 UMWA miners against metallurgical coal firm Warrior Met in Brookwood, Alabama continues, and Sarah Jones at New York Magazine has more.
Good to see mainstream press covering the issue.
Yep. Some new big strike threats have surfaced this week. First, on the railroads, the 17,000 BNSF workers with BLET, which is a Teamsters union, and SMART TD. These are all acronyms of unions, and I don't know what they stand for, who said they'd be moving towards a strike authorization vote, have in fact formally authorized a strike. Wow. Though BNSF is suing to put the brakes on it. BNSF is like the employer. They're suing to put the brakes on the strike, and the decision will apparently be made by a Trump appointee judge on Monday. Perhaps the bigger news is that the 11 union rail bargaining coordinated bargaining coalition. So there's an 11 union bargaining coalition of railroad workers called the Coordinated Bargaining Coalition. They are also moving in the direction of striking, covering 105,000 rail workers across major freight companies. I'd strongly recommend you to follow Labor Notes staff writer Joe DeManuel Hall's work on this, as he has been talking to rail workers and can explain the mysteries of the special labor law, the Railway Labor Act, which covers these workers. We're not as close to a strike as a normal strike authorization would mean because of the wonky way in which the Railway Labor Act works, but at the same time, railroad workers do seem to be at a breaking point.
And Jacob, I actually have an update on that. As Jonah mentioned, there was going to be a ruling in terms of the BNSF employees, and a federal judge ruled today, Tuesday, January 25th, that the union workers must go to arbitration over the new attendance policy, effectively blocking them from striking. So there again, we see where judges can be, on the side of management, and that's why it's always best if you can win your fights without having to go through the courts. And one of the things I see has been cited by the judge. This is U.S. District Judge Mark T. Pittman of the Northern Texas District. By ruling in favor of the company, he also discussed how it would deprive shippers of transportation, hurt revenue, supposedly threaten the safety of the general public.
That's the point!
Yeah. So he acknowledged the tremendous power these workers have, and that was enough to, basically shoo them away, hope they will go to arbitration, and all die down. So very, disappointing, but not necessarily surprising that the judge came down that way. I'm looking here, and it looks like the union and the company will be heading to mediation. And the new attendance policy was supposed to go into effect February 1st. So we'll see how that pans out. But yeah, very disappointing. Hate to see that, and just really hope that the union is able to I don't want to say bypass arbitration. They need to go through the process. But I hope that there is enough power and support inside the workforce and their allies to really put pressure on the company.
Yeah. Speaking of the Railway Labor Act, AFA-CWA flight attendants at Piedmont Airlines, which is a mid-Atlantic regional carrier owned by American Airlines, they have a tentative agreement after authorizing a strike in October. Educators at Anacostia High School in Washington, D.C. held a job action on Friday, shutting down classes for the day over both violence and COVID-19 safety issues. Negotiations sound rocky with educators in Escambia County, Florida. And workers who make Corvette for GM in Bowling Green, Kentucky are also on the strike path. But nothing immediate, as they are under the national GM agreement in addition to their local negotiations. In Virginia, a couple groups of public sector workers rallied for the fight to collectively bargain, a decision that is now up to local jurisdictions per the newish state law, which, by the way, local educators in Alabama, it is up to municipalities if they want to collectively bargain with you. There is no bar on collective bargaining in state law.
Right. There is no legal mechanism that says teachers in Madison City schools
cannot have a collective bargaining agreement.
Right. There's nothing barring a school board and superintendent from agreeing to a collective bargaining agreement.
Yeah. Just putting that out there. So just do with that information what you will. In Virginia Beach, Virginia, city workers with UE Local 111 pushed for a local ordinance, and United Campus Workers is making noise at Virginia Commonwealth University and the University of Virginia. After bargaining for a first contract at Dish Network since 2010.
Wow.
12 years bargaining for a first contract. Members of CWA Local 6171 in Crum, Texas have a 2-year agreement.
That is ridiculous. And that's
wild.
That's why we talk a lot about our broken labor law system and why we need the PRO Act and why we need these other improvements. That's obscene. 12 years.
That's wild.
12 years. As I mentioned earlier, I mean, there are probably members of that local who had children around that time who are now in middle school.
Yeah. Wild.
But shout out to 6171 CWA for getting that contract.
MLB Players Association bargaining with the MLB resumed after a leisurely 6 weeks of no talking during an ongoing lockout. The lockout will, of course, be much more visible if it continues beyond the offseason and delays the March 31st season kickoff, which is increasingly likely.
Yeah, I based on what I followed with this, it looks like the owners wanted this to drag out.
Right.
They wanted it to impact spring training. I don't know how much of that is just pressure on the players, like physically, and how much of it is to try to garner public support because, oh no, my games aren't on.
Right.
Those players get paid money, so I'm mad. I don't know. But hey, solidarity with the Major League Baseball players. They are selling their labor in exchange for a wage. Some of them quite nice wages, but some of them not so much, and they are, putting their bodies out there. So,
right,
support the players.
The three unions that represent Social Security Administration employees, AFGE, NTEU, and the Association of Administrative Law Judges, have all reached a return to in-person work agreement with their employer, the Social Security Administration. This comes after the Social Security Administration issuing a return-to-work order for January the 5th that was deemed unlawful because it was not bargained over. And so now they have a bargained-over return-to-in-person work agreement with their workers, and that's what being in a union workplace with a contract can get you. Your employer cannot unilaterally impose, we talked about this just last week, or maybe it was the week before, about how return to work is a mandatory subject of bargaining if you have a union contract. Your employer cannot arbitrarily change these things. That is what the Social Security Administration did despite having a contract in place, and so they were overruled. They acknowledged that, and they went to the bargaining table, and the workers were able to secure an agreement there. So that's good news. In politics, the Biden administration has enacted the $15 an hour minimum wage for all federal civilian employees, which affects 67,000 workers in a move that seemed kind of quiet. I didn't hear about it until I read the newsletter for an administration that is looking for bread and butter wins.
Yeah.
But 67,000 workers getting a raise That's not bad.
Yeah, I had not seen this anywhere else.
I mean, the announcement of I think he signed the executive order doing this some time ago, but it has now been enacted, and you would think that they would be like,
hey, you ought to celebrate the signing of it and the enactment of it, right? You ought to
really
talk about that.
In an administration with so few victories, you should, you should be pushing the few victories that you have out.
And of course, $15 is not what $15 was 10 years ago as the Fight for 15 movement really started gaining steam. So I guess congratulations for almost keeping up with the inflation of the past year. Yeah.
The Biden administration is also expanding the H-2B visa program for 20,000 more non-agricultural workers, a move that, quote-unquote, the unions, per this Bloomberg Law article, which cites Unite Here and the AFL-CIO leaders, are pushing back on, which I wouldn't be surprised because there is opposition to some of the way that immigrant workers are brought in, mainly that they are tied to their employment. A lot of these immigrant workers on these H-2B visas they're tied to their, meaning they're brought in here, and if they lose their job, they're sent back. So, wow. I wonder what kind of incentive that creates for a worker who is in an abusive environment or an unsafe environment. I wonder what kind of incentives that has on their ability to report to the authorities illegal activities that's going on or to organize for a better workplace themselves. Man, I wonder what kind of incentive that puts on the worker.
Yeah, it's pretty disturbing power dynamic there.
Yeah. And finally, the new Bureau of Labor Statistics unionization numbers came out this week, and they were predictably depressing, with 241,000 fewer union members now than there were a year ago, and 2 million fewer than there were 20 years ago, despite there being 14 million more workers added to the workforce in those 2 decades. 10.3% of U.S. workers are union, and 6.1% of workers in the private sector are union. There are tons of ways to slice and dice the data, but the punchline is the union movement, measured in the fundamental metric of organization, or membership, is continuing its downward trajectory. It also remains true that there are 14 million unionized workers in the country, which is a massive organizational and social base from which to build.
And something, I recall a comment recently on YouTube during one of our live episodes that kind of just responding to all the good news in terms of organizing wins and responding to this wave of strikes. And it was more or less, well, why are there still so few people joining unions? Mm-hmm. And I think part of that is 1 year is not going to undo decades upon decades. Certainly.
I would be interested in seeing what happens, what the numbers look like in 2 or 3 years, because a year is how long it can take a campaign to, you do oftentimes a year of organizing before you even file a petition, So,
I guess to tease out that question, that's the first answer is just historical trends. It's hard to undo that. Certainly in just a year's time. The other piece of it, of course, is the labor law system itself and how unfriendly that is to new organizing. You can also look at some of the weaknesses inside currently existing unions. And sometimes those can be their own worst enemy and not really help themselves in terms of recruiting and adding new organizing. But, I think the last statement there's still 14 million of us, and that's huge. And while it may be small in context, it's still a huge number of people who are engaged in the collective process of fighting for each other and for a better society.
Yeah, exactly. As we are wrapping up today, if you missed our interview with Kenzo Shibata, he is a member and activist in the Chicago Teachers Union. You can find it on YouTube or your favorite podcasting app. He also has an op-ed published by Truthout that you should check out. We're linking to that in the show notes. Starbucks Workers United has a merch shop, and all of the proceeds go towards their campaigns. You can leave us a voice. We're going to put that in the show notes as well. You can leave us a voicemail, and we might answer it on the next show. That is 844-899-TVLR, 844-899-8857, and give us your money. Our largest source of revenue, seriously, is our listeners. There's not a single... We get more money from our listeners than any of the other unions or nonprofits or federations. Our largest single source of revenue is our listeners, so your support really does matter, and it really does help. You can give us money at unionly.io/o/TVLR. You've been listening to the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison. My co-host is Adam Keller, and we will see you next week.